Hello, and welcome back to Mammalian Anatomy at Keuka College. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion on Chapter 12, and we will be focusing on Part 1, the organization of the nervous system. And here we'll look specifically at the divisions of the nervous system. The nervous system can be divided both anatomically and functionally. So today we're going to focus on what are the different ways we can divide the nervous system based on its structure and what it does. The nervous system has two anatomical divisions. The first would be the central nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. So that is located here and here. So here we have the brain that would be in the cranial cavity, and then the spinal cord that would be in the vertebral cavity. Both of these structures are going to be responsible for receiving sensory input and integrating that information. And then from there, once that information is integrated, it's going to decide on what motor actions that the body should take. So it's going to really understand the external and internal environment and create a holistic picture of it and determine what's the best way to respond to those environments. The second anatomical division is going to be the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is going to consist of cranial nerves and spinal nerves. So on this diagram, there are going to actually be 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and cranial nerves are nerves that will actually be derived from the brain. And then over here, what we can see is the spinal nerves. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. In chapters 13 and 14 that we'll discuss in the future, we'll learn the specific names and functions of these cranial and spinal nerves. And we'll also learn what these nerves innervate, both the muscular innervation and the cutaneous innervation. The last structure that is found in the peripheral nervous system are known as ganglia. This is plural. Ganglia are going to be located here and here. They look like little widened parts of nerves. Essentially, what a ganglia is a collection of cell bodies found in the peripheral nervous system, and this is where a lot of synapsing and communication will occur. Note, there are also cell bodies found in the central nervous system, but we do not call those ganglia. Instead, those are called nuclei. So there are variations in the terms we use for similar structures in the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. So what are the functions of the peripheral nervous system? It's going to help sense and carry information from the sensory receptors and carry that information to the central nervous system where it can be processed. It's also going to carry motor information from the central nervous system to effector organs, and it will stimulate those effector organs to perform a particular action. So to summarize, there are two anatomical divisions: the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which consists of cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and ganglia. The peripheral nervous system can be divided based on functional divisions, and there are subcategories within subcategories, so bear with me for this next part of the lecture. But let's talk about those functional divisions of the peripheral nervous system. The first division that we're going to talk about is going to be the sensory or afferent division of the peripheral nervous system. I always remember A for arrives. Information is arriving to the brain and spinal cord. So if you want to use the term afferent, that's how you can remember that. And again, just as a reminder, the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system is going to carry information from sensory receptors to the central nervous system. I did want to take this opportunity to talk about sensory receptors in a little bit more detail. Sensory receptors can actually be directly attached as proteins or receptors on dendrites or cell bodies of the sensory nerve or the sensory neuron, or it could be a different cell that sensory neuron interacts with. So it can be directly attached or indirectly directly attached to the neuron, or it won't. So it could be either way. These sensory receptors are going to be both internal and external. It'll help us understand our internal environment and also help us understand our external environment. And the major role of sensory receptors are to convert the signal or stimulus that we're getting from these environments into electrical signals, a type of signal that the nervous system can understand. So the nervous system can't understand all details about light and sound and taste and smell directly, but what the sensory receptor is going to do is bind or interact with these stimuli in some sort of way and eventually turn that into an electrical signal that can be used and processed by the nervous system. This diagram is kind of trying to go over the subdivisions of the nervous system and specifically into the peripheral nervous system. For now, we're just going to focus on the sensory division here, which is a subdivision of the peripheral nervous system. Just to help you read this diagram a little bit easier, the circles are going to represent structures that are part of that division, so specific nerve fibers. And so nerve fibers are axons with a unique function and long axons with a unique function. So the circles represent structure, while the squares represent function. So the function of the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system is to conduct impulses to the central nervous system. So just focus on this part of the diagram at the moment. We'll come back to the motor division later. So just be patient with me. So let's kind of talk about the structures that are located in the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system. We're going to be talking about nerve fibers. And so what a nerve fiber is a long axon that is going to have a unique function. And what we'll see here is we're going to divide these nerve fibers based on the areas that they innervate. So we're going to look at two terms, somatic versus visceral. Somatic refers to nerve fibers that innervate anything that is external to the ventral cavity. So things such as the skin, the muscle, the joints. So these are going to be all somatic sensory fibers that are going to be innervating these areas. Visceral, on the other hand, and we'll talk about it more in detail in a bit, but visceral is going to be nerve fibers or axons that are going to innervate the ventral cavity. So it's going to innervate organs such as like the digestive system, the heart, the liver, those sorts of organs that are inside of that cavity. So let's talk about somatic sensory fibers and look at two more divisions of them, general versus special. Somatic sensory fibers, as I have mentioned, is going to go to areas of the external body, and that is going to be outside of the ventral cavity. And we can divide somatic sensory fibers into general versus special. General somatic sensory fibers are going to be spread throughout the body in areas such as like the skin and the muscles and the joints. So general means it's going to be found in many locations throughout the external body. And these are going to detect sensations such as touch, pressure, vibration. It can also detect proprioception. Proprioception is a sense where we can determine where our body is in space and time without having to look at our joints. So I bet if you're sitting in bed at a table, you know exactly where your foot is and the angle of your joint without even having to look at it. So that would be an example of proprioception, and that would be an example of a general somatic sensory fiber going to that area. So general meaning going to be spread throughout the body. We also have special somatic sensory fibers. We have nerve fibers or axons that are going to be confined to a small area. Usually these areas are going to be located in the head, and special somatic sensory fibers are going to innervate the eye and the ear. And so what information we're going to get from it is we're going to be able to see, have hearing, and then also equilibrium. Equilibrium is our body's ability to balance, and our ear plays a really important role in maintaining balance. We'll learn a little bit more about that when we get into special senses. So this diagram just kind of reviews what we have learned about so far. We're talking about fibers here, nerve fibers, which are going to be axons, long axons with specific functions. So these are structural things that we're looking at. And we've talked about the somatic sensory fibers that are going to innervate the external part of our body. These fibers can be, there can be a subcategory, oops, there we go. There can be a subcategory called general, which is going to go to our skin, muscles, joints, those sorts of things. And it's going to feel things such as touch, pain, pressure, and all that sort of stuff. General meaning it's going to be found throughout these areas in a large distance or a large area throughout the body. Special, on the other hand, are going to be nerve fibers that are just going to be located into specific areas of the body. And for somatic sensory fibers, that's going to include the eye and the ear, and it's going to be responsible for hearing, equilibrium, and vision. Now let's switch over to visceral sensory fibers. So visceral sensory fibers are going to be fibers that are going to innervate the visceral cavity. So it's going to go to areas that include the digestive tract, the urinary tract, the heart, anything inside the ventral cavity. Again, we can divide these fibers into general versus special. General visceral sensory fibers are going to be spread throughout the ventral cavity, and it's going to go to organs such as the digestive system and the urinary system. And it will detect things such as stretch, pain, hunger, and nausea. So we have these special type of sensory receptors that can detect stretch. They're called baroreceptors because they can help us kind of understand the different types of pressure that is occurring within an organ. And a good example of stretch receptors that are in the visceral cavity is going to be within the urinary bladder. So as the urinary bladder fills, it will stretch, and when these stretch receptors detect that change in volume, it's going to actually send a signal to the spinal cord to initiate the feeling of needing to urinate. And so it will initiate that reflex. So that is just a specific example of a general sensory fiber in action. We also have special visceral sensory fibers. So these again are going to be confined to a very small area, usually located in the head. This would include things such as the tongue and the nose. That would still be considered visceral, and because it would be part of the kind of ventral cavity. Well, not necessarily. It's more because our body has a two-layer system. We are a tube within a tube. We have a digestive and respiratory tube and a urinary tube kind of on the inside of our body, and then it's surrounded by an external tube that would consist of like our muscles and our skin and our bones. So it has to do with how the body embryologically. And again, if you are interested in embryology and you want to understand the tube within a tube kind of setup of the human body, check out chapter 3 in your textbook. But that was a tangent. Let's get back to the lecture. So we have special visceral sensory fibers, and these are going to go to areas such as the nose and the mouth. And it's going to help us determine things such as taste and smell. So this diagram is going back a little bit. We're looking now here at the visceral sensory fibers, the axons that innervate the ventral cavity. And they can either be general, so it'll be found throughout the ventral cavity and be responsible for detecting stretch, pain, and all sorts of things. Oops. Inside our ventral cavity. There can also be special sensory fibers within the visceral sensory system, and that would go to like the tongue and the nose and be responsible for taste and smell. That was really long. So just to do a quick recap of the system is the sensory division or the afferent division detects signals from the internal or external environment and brings that information into the central nervous system. We have somatic sensory fibers and visceral sensory fibers. Somatic detects things such is going to be found in areas like our muscles and our skin, while visceral is going to be things that are in our ventral cavity, like our digestive tract and our urinary tract. And each of these can be divided into general versus special. General refers to being found throughout that area, so it's going to be found in a wider region of the body. And special is going to be localized to only specific regions within the body, so like just the eye or just the tongue. Shifting gears a little bit, we're going to talk about the motor and efferent division of the peripheral nervous system. So, almost done. So just so you know, the sensory division is known as afferent with an A, and the motor division is also known as efferent with an E. I'm specifically saying these terms incorrectly to make it easier to understand over video. They are both called afferent, but to make it easier, I call the sensory division afferent with an A, and the motor division efferent with an E, just to make it easier to detect. So FYI, I'm saying it wrong on purpose. So let's now talk about the motor division. The motor division is going to carry information away from the central nervous system to effector organs. And these effector organs are going to be responsible for creating changes in the body and making movement to allow for there to be a response to our internal and external environment. Some examples of effectors are going to be muscles. These will include all of 3 types of muscles: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. It'll include glands, so like the adrenal gland or the thyroid gland, and adipose tissue. So there will be response going to the fat of our body, especially during a fight or flight kind of response, and it will help mobilize the fat in our body to be used for energy. I promise this one is not as long. So we're coming back to this diagram. This diagram shows over here the motor division. We are going to have motor nerve fibers that are located or form the structure of the motor division. And over here, this square is indicating the function of the motor division. It's going to send impulses from the central nervous system to the effector organs. We can further subdivide the motor division based on different functions that these fibers have. We'll get back to that diagram in just a moment. So what are the subdivisions of the motor division? They will include the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is going to be composed of somatic nerve fibers, both somatic nerve fibers, and these fibers are going to be voluntary. So we have the ability to control the somatic nervous system. And generally, this will innervate the skeletal muscles of our body. So if we want to do jumping jacks, or want to do crunches, or yesterday I was having a lot of fun dancing, specifically to Doja Cat. So that is going to be mediated by the somatic nervous system. The other one is going to be the autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system is going to be mediated by visceral motor neurons. And for the most part, it's going to be, well, entirely, it's going to be involuntary. So we can't control what our autonomic nervous system does. And these are going to go to effector organs such as the cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, glands, and adipose tissue. So you can't automatically think, hey, blood vessel, the smooth muscles in the blood vessels, I want you to dilate, so to lower my blood pressure. You can't do that directly. So that is unfortunate. I would think that would be a very helpful skill, but hey, life is life. So Somatic is going to be voluntary and go to skeletal muscles, and autonomic is going to be involuntary and it's going to go to the effector organs listed here. So let's kind of go back to that diagram really quick and just to look at these divisions. So here we have the motor division, and there are two subcategories of the motor division. Somatic, which is going to go to the skeletal muscles and be voluntary. And so it can allow us to do jumping jacks and dance around. And autonomic, which is going to be involuntary, and it's going to go and do things like speed up or slow down our heart rate, and be able to salivate when there's like a tasty cupcake or something. These are all going to be autonomic, mediated by the autonomic nervous system. Just so you know, the autonomic nervous system can be further subdivided into sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. So let's talk about these divisions with the diagram. Sympathetic division is going to be responsible for our fight, flight, or freeze response. So when you're in a dangerous situation, this is going to be mobilized. And so it's going to do things such as increase our heart rate and make our palms sweaty. It's going to dilate our pupils in our eyes so we can gather more information. So it's going to get ready for that situation. So we're going to either fight it off, we're going to run away, or we can freeze in place and get really nervous and stay still. This is also used for exercise. So this is why exercise is such a great way to process anxiety and fearful situations, because it reorients and reprograms how we think of these fight or flight freeze responses. So that is an awesome thing for exercise. The other subdivision of the autonomic nervous system is going to be the parasympathetic division, and it's going to be our kind of rest and digest division, and it's going to help us conserve energy. And it's going to do just general housekeeping things for our body. I remember kind of the acronym SLUDD with D, SLUDD. S stands for salivate, L stands for lactate, U for urinate, the first D for digest, and the second D for defecate. So as you can see, it's going to do a lot of your kind of relaxed, chilling out kind of things you do in your day-to-day life. So those are the things that the parasympathetic nervous system controls. All right. That's the end of our lecture on the divisions of the nervous system. If you have questions or concerns, I know this was a long lecture and a lot of little parts. Don't be shy to email me through my Keuka College email, and I will be happy to help, and we'll review it together. Have a great day and be good to yourselves. Bye-bye.